"Mom," Owen said into the mic, and the auditorium froze. My name fell from his mouth like glass, bright and cutting. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, toward Victor. The stage lights bleached his freckles, and his hands trembled around the mic. "She steals my medication," he added, voice breaking, "then sells it for cash." A breathless hush moved across bleachers like a wave crossing shallow sand. I stood while programs slid from laps, paper whispers slicing the quiet. Victor's jaw flexed once, then his gaze dropped to his glowing phone. The principal reached for the mic, but Owen pulled it closer, shaking. "I wish I wasn't scared," he said, and the room began buzzing. The buzz became words, the words became verdicts, and my name burned. A woman 2 rows up murmured, "Unfit," like she was tasting spoiled milk. I smelled floor polish, sweat, cheap perfume, and something sourly metallic. My knees wanted to fold, but stubborn pride kept me upright there. "Owen," I said softly, careful not to embarrass him further here. He wouldn't meet my eyes, his stare fastened somewhere near Victor's collar. Victor kept typing, silent, the glow lighting his careful, unreadable face. The principal signaled security, then smiled wide, a curtain pulled against panic. "Let's celebrate achievements," she said, shooing applause that arrived brittle and wrong. Owen's mouth tightened, and the polished stage looked suddenly hostile and far. They moved the ceremony along like nothing terrible had torn through us. Names were called and claps arrived late, like footsteps after thunder. I watched Owen return to his seat, shoulders squared like practiced armor. He sat beside the school counselor, who whispered against his ear gently. The counselor nodded toward Victor, and Victor nodded back without lifting eyes. It felt staged, like a scene blocked on sticky tape backstage. My pulse banged in my throat, counting a rhythm I couldn't slow. A mother behind me scooted away, like guilt shed through contact somehow. I wanted to hold Owen, but he kept staring forward, blinking. The counselor's hand stayed on his shoulder, proprietorial, soft, and strategic. Security approached me quietly, apologizing for disruption, inviting me toward the corridor. "For everyone's comfort," one said, and my cheeks burned with disciplined fury. I nodded because fighting here would feed gossip a second dessert. In the hallway, the air cooled, and the fluorescent hum steadied me. Through the doors, I watched my son pretending to breathe like grown men. Victor finally looked up, caught my eyes, and then looked deliberately away. He typed something, slid the phone into his pocket, and smiled small. That smile wasn't comfort. It was closure on a plan clicking shut. I tasted copper behind my tongue and leaned against painted cinder-block walls. My voice stayed level as I whispered, "I will not disappear tonight." A teacher offered water, plastic against my shaking fingers, kindness bordering pity. I thanked her, then stepped outside where ocean wind combed the flags. Cars idled, headlights painting stripes across asphalt like restless metronomes counting. My phone vibrated with messages, some supportive, most suspicious, all heavy. I ignored them and called Owen's voicemail, afraid he'd silence mine too. "I love you," I said, careful, measured, steady against the dark sky. "I'll fix whatever this is, even if you hate me now." Behind me, applause spattered through the doors like distant rain on metal. I turned toward the lot, straightened, and breathed until my ribs softened. I walked to my car and promised myself the night wouldn't end me. The car's interior smelled of paper and old rain, a mix that steadied me. I sat there with headlights from passing cars sliding like ghosts over the dashboard. Owen's words looped through my head in broken pieces, colliding, repeating, grinding down sense. "She sells it for cash." The phrase didn't belong to him. It sounded rehearsed, flat, like lines whispered in practice. I remembered the counselor, Dana Kincaid, leaning toward him earlier, her voice syrupy. Victor had arranged that meeting. He'd said it would help Owen's focus. I thought he meant counseling, not scripting. I gripped the steering wheel until plastic creaked under my palms. I whispered, "No one tells my son to hate me," and felt the tremor ease into steel. The dashboard clock blinked 9:22 as I stared at the school entrance, still glowing faintly. Parents filed out in clusters, laughing, whispering, glancing my way as they passed. Their eyes said judgment wrapped in concern, soft daggers under sugar coats. I watched Victor exit beside Dana, his arm brushing hers like it wasn't new. He laughed, small, genuine, free of the tension he wore inside. They didn't notice me through the windshield, but my heart cataloged the detail. I lifted my phone and took a single photo through the misted glass. Proof? Maybe not yet, but someday soon. The word someday began shaping into something sharper inside me. At home, the kitchen lights glared too bright, mocking the quiet. Owen's half-finished cereal from morning sat in the sink, soggy and gray. I traced the rim of his bowl with my fingertip, then opened the drawer where his meds should have been. The bottle was there, but the pills were wrong. Smaller, duller, not the same imprint. I compared labels, dates, pharmacist signatures. Someone had swapped the bottle. Same sticker, different contents. My breath shortened. Victor handled the last refill, said he'd pick it up after work. My mind started mapping every detail backward, cross-referencing tones, timing, distance. A pattern emerged like a bruise under skin. Subtle, ugly, spreading. I went to my laptop and opened our shared bank account. 3 ATM withdrawals, $40 each, in locations I never visited. Same days. As missing medication reports. I clicked through receipts, saw a pharmacy pickup with Victor's signature scrawled. Dispensed. My throat tightened as pieces settled into place, crooked but undeniable. He'd been setting me up slowly, neatly, believably. I looked toward the living room, where our family photo still smiled from the mantel. My own face stared back, unaware, mid-laugh, arms around both of them. That woman didn't know what I knew now. I whispered, "You trusted the wrong man." Outside, wind rattled the windows like someone testing the locks. I reached for my phone and dialed voicemail again, not expecting an answer. "Owen," I said quietly, "I'm going to find out who made you say that." The vow left my mouth like an oath carved in stone. I have to know the truth. Morning light fell across the kitchen like a lie, pretending to be gentle. I hadn't slept, not really. I just watched the night fade behind unopened curtains. The air smelled of burnt coffee and tension, the kind that hums beneath skin. Every sound felt exaggerated, the faucet drip, the fridge hum, the uneven tick of the wall clock. I replayed last night frame by frame, searching for logic in chaos. Owen's trembling hands, Victor's stillness, Dana's whisper, my own frozen breath. None of it made sense, yet all of it fit together too neatly. I walked through the kitchen, notebook in hand, writing the word motive at the top of a blank page. Beneath it I listed custody, money, power. Then, without meaning to, I added another, control. At 9 I called the pharmacy, pretending to confirm a refill. The clerk hesitated, said the last pickup was signed by V. Hanlon. I thanked her, even smiled, while my heart slid somewhere cold and small. That signature was a confession, neat and polite. I checked Owen's school emails and found one from Dana Kincaid. "Please monitor dosage compliance for continued accommodation." Attached was a form, claiming missed doses. My name was on it, but not my handwriting. The letters leaned differently, like someone imitating my style with a practiced hand. My stomach flipped. Victor always handled forms, said he was better with details. I suddenly saw his confidence for what it was, a rehearsal, not a gift. Later, at work, whispers preceded me down the hall. A colleague paused too long by the copier, another avoided eye contact altogether. I smiled, polite, and typed through their murmurs. The office buzzed with the faint electricity of scandal. By lunch, I couldn't breathe. I walked outside, past the parking lot, into the small park across the street. Kids played, mothers laughed, and the sound sliced me open with memory. 3 summers ago, Owen had brought me a melted ice cream cone, sticky and proud. "You're like my real mom," he'd said then, grinning through drips of chocolate. That memory should have warmed me, but today, it burned. I'd built that love piece by fragile piece, and now someone was rewriting the script. By evening, Victor texted, "Let's talk when you've calmed down." I read it twice, almost laughed. Calm was a mask I'd worn long before tonight. I typed back, "Dinner at 7, we'll talk." Then I deleted it. I didn't owe him calm. I owed myself clarity. I took photos of every document in the kitchen drawer, every receipt, every signature. I hid the USB drive in the lining of my coat pocket. I looked at my reflection in the window, pale, wide-eyed, alive in a way I hadn't been for years. I whispered, "He thinks I'll crumble," but I wouldn't. I couldn't. The humiliation had turned into something sharper, like glass remade into a weapon. That night, as the streetlights hummed outside, I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by evidence. The world outside kept turning, neighbors laughing, dogs barking, someone playing old music too loud. My phone buzzed once. A message from Owen. "Can I stay at Dad's tonight?" The words twisted deep, but I typed back. Of course. I wouldn't chase him. Not yet. I needed him to feel safe, even if it meant staying in danger's shadow. I looked around the room, my fortress of paper and proof, and felt something shift. Fear no longer anchored me. It fueled me. My voice came out steady when I said aloud, "They've written their story. Now I'll write mine." The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hides sharp edges underneath. Every shadow looked like a secret, and every silence felt rehearsed. I moved through rooms on bare feet, opening drawers, sliding photos from frames, checking corners I'd never noticed before. My reflection followed me in glass doors, pale and determined. Somewhere between the pantry and the hall closet, fear gave way to precision. I was no longer the woman shocked on stage. I was the woman writing her own script now, one step ahead. I poured Victor's leftover whiskey into the sink, watching it swirl away like evidence of weakness. The scent lingered, bitter and expensive, the smell of his victories. Not anymore. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook again, this time making 2 columns, facts and unknown. Under facts, I wrote what I could prove: forged form, stolen medication, and his signature at the pharmacy. Under unknown, I wrote Dana's role in Tessa's silence. My sister's name looked strange there, too clean for betrayal, but I'd learned not to trust what looks gentle. She'd stopped calling weeks ago after asking about my house title and joint account. I thought she was embarrassed about money. Now I wasn't so sure. The pieces didn't just point to Victor. They reached outward, touching people I'd let close. I drove to the edge of town where the pharmacy lights still burned against night. I parked and sat there, counting breaths, watching customers come and go. When the clerk locked up, I took note of the time. Everything about tonight felt like gathering coordinates for a map only I could read. My phone buzzed a message from Victor. "Let's be civil, for Owen's sake." That phrase, polished and practiced, felt like bait. Civility had become his shield, the mask he wore when cornered. I turned the phone face down and watched my reflection in the black screen. For the first time, I liked what I saw: calm, calculating, deliberate. At home, I checked the front door twice, then opened Victor's office drawer. Inside lay a trust attorney's card, a printed email thread, and a single sticky note with custody review written in his handwriting. My throat went dry. He wasn't just undermining me, he was preparing to erase me. The anger that followed wasn't loud, it was precise, measured, almost serene. I gathered each item carefully, photographed them, and returned them to their exact place. He would never know what I knew until I chose to reveal it. The decision steadied me. Revenge, I realized, wasn't an explosion. It was a slow burn that required air and patience. I stepped outside into the backyard, the night air cool against my flushed skin. The ocean sound reached faintly from beyond the dunes, constant, old, unbothered by human wreckage. I closed my eyes and matched its rhythm until my heartbeat slowed. "You won't destroy me quietly," I whispered to the dark. Above me, stars blinked like indifferent witnesses, the kind that had seen worse secrets before. The fear that had ruled me was gone. In its place stood something leaner and far more dangerous: resolve. Inside, I turned off the lights, sat beside the window, and began drafting a list of people I could trust. It was short, painfully so. One name kept circling back in my mind: Lila Moreno, the private investigator who once lived next door. She'd owe me nothing, and that made her perfect. I underlined her name twice and whispered, "Tomorrow." Then I closed the notebook, leaned back, and exhaled. The game had started. The diner smelled of burnt toast and old coffee, the kind of place where secrets slipped easily between sugar packets. I spotted Lila Moreno in the back booth, her hair shorter now, streaked with silver, her eyes still sharp enough to slice through lies. "You look like someone standing at the edge," she said, not as greeting but as diagnosis. I sat across from her, sliding a folder onto the table. Inside were copies of pharmacy slips, Victor's signature, and the email from Dana. She flipped through each page slowly, tapping a finger when something caught her attention. "This isn't carelessness," she murmured. "This is orchestration." The word landed heavy, like a door closing somewhere behind me. Lila used to work for a private security firm before going independent. She knew how to trace footprints even when people thought they'd walked clean. "You want confirmation or destruction?" she asked, eyes lifting from the papers. I didn't hesitate. "Both," I said. She smiled, just slightly, like that was the only right answer. We spent an hour outlining timelines, the refill dates, the staged reports, the meetings Victor arranged. She wrote on a napkin, crisp handwriting that looked like geometry: "Follow money, follow motive, follow whispers." Every line drew a clearer path between them, and at the center, Victor waited, smug in ignorance. When I told her about Dana, Lila nodded slowly. School counselor with access to student medical compliance reports, she said. Convenient ally. Maybe paid, maybe promised. Her voice carried no judgment, only analysis. What about your sister? I hesitated. She asked about refinancing the house. I thought it was just desperation. Lila tilted her head. Desperation makes people dangerous, especially family. That word family twisted something inside me. I thought of Owen's face on stage, how he couldn't even look at me, how Victor's coaching had replaced my love with suspicion. We left the diner before sunrise. The streets were empty, the air thin with fog. Lila handed me a prepaid phone, her version of trust. No texts, no emails, she said. You talk to me here, nowhere else. I nodded. She turned away, her coat flaring like a shadow cutting through steam. For the first time in weeks, I felt a thin thread of control winding back into my hands. I drove home through sleeping neighborhoods, headlights sweeping over porches where families still believed in safety. The sky began bruising from blue to gray. Somewhere, Victor was waking up, thinking I was still broken. He had no idea the pieces were rearranging into something sharper. At home, I showered and stared at my reflection fogging in the mirror. The woman staring back looked unfamiliar, leaner, steadier, dangerous in her quiet. I dressed for work as usual, pretending the day would be ordinary. When Victor texted, "Dinner tonight? For Owen?" I replied, "Sure." It was easier to let him think he still held the narrative. The illusion would make the fall sweeter. I slipped Lila's napkin into my wallet and whispered her words again. Follow money, follow motive, follow whispers. By afternoon, Lila sent me a message through the secure line. Got footage. My pulse jumped. I opened the link and watched Dana hand Victor a sealed envelope outside the school's side entrance. Same night Owen's dosage record changed. The timestamp sat neatly beside the lie. I pressed pause and felt my hands tremble, not from fear but focus. You taught him well, I whispered to no one, but I'm learning faster. The next evening, Lila arrived at my house with a drive tucked inside a plain envelope. Her expression gave away little, but her eyes carried the kind of truth you can't unsee. It's all there, she said softly. I led her into the kitchen where the table was cleared except for a single lamp casting a yellow circle over polished wood. The air smelled faintly of lemons and anxiety. She plugged the drive into my laptop, and the screen filled with dates, transactions, and videos arranged in neat, damning order. You were right, she said. This isn't just a custody setup, it's a financial one. My stomach turned, but I forced myself to watch every frame. The footage showed Victor meeting Dana outside a coffee shop 3 separate times. Each meeting ended with an envelope and a handshake. The files from the bank showed a steady pattern, money funneling into Victor's consulting account, then vanishing into something labeled Education Support Initiative. Fake charity, Lila said, zooming in. Used to disguise kickbacks. Classic small-town laundering. My breath slowed until it matched the quiet hum of the laptop fan. Every doubt I'd clung to, every hope that maybe I'd misunderstood, was gone now. He wasn't just framing me, he was cashing in on the destruction. Then Lila clicked another folder marked Personal. Inside was a thread of messages between Victor and Tessa. My heart skipped, then stumbled. The first message read, "Once she's deemed unfit, equity releases within 30 days. Tessa's reply came quick, "Make it happen before my audit." My throat went dry. Lila watched me silently, giving me space to absorb the blow. The pain didn't come as a cry, it came as a stillness that felt endless. "My sister," I whispered. She knew. Lila closed the laptop lid gently, like sealing a coffin. "You needed the truth," she said. "Now you have it." I walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Owen's old swing still swayed in the breeze. I remembered him begging me to push higher, laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. That laughter lived somewhere far away now, behind lies and paperwork and adult greed. I turned back to Lila. "If they did this together," I said quietly, "they'll try to bury it the moment they sense I know." Lila nodded. "Then don't let them sense it. You're holding the detonator now." Her tone was calm, practical, but her eyes gleamed with understanding. I realized she'd been here before, maybe not with family, but with betrayal that carried its own scent. After she left, I sat alone with the laptop open again, forcing myself to watch the video of Dana and Victor once more. I noted every detail: the model of the car, the cafe sign reflected in the glass, the way Victor's hand brushed hers. I wasn't jealous. I was cataloging evidence. Emotion would come later, After justice. I opened a new document and titled it Chronology. Line by line, I wrote, date, action, proof. The words stacked like bricks, building the foundation for something unstoppable. By midnight, exhaustion pulled at me, but my mind stayed sharp. I knew I couldn't go to the police yet, not without airtight evidence. Victor would twist everything, claim manipulation, feign innocence. He'd practiced that face for years. Instead, I needed to gather quietly, systematically, until there was nowhere left for him to hide. As I shut down the laptop, the reflection of my face lingered in the dark screen. I didn't look broken anymore. I looked ready. "You built this storm," I murmured to the empty house, "and I'm learning how to steer it." The storm broke on a Wednesday afternoon when Lila called and said, "You need to sit down." Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was the kind people use before changing everything. I closed my office door, heart punching against my ribs like it wanted out. "What did you find?" I asked. Paper rustled on her end, the sound of truth preparing to wound. "Everything," she said. "Victor's company, Dana's fabricated reports, even the bank connections. It's all linked to a loan that doesn't exist." I stared at the calendar on the wall, family photos pinned. Beneath cheerful quotes about trust, the word made me want to laugh. "How bad?" I asked. "Bad enough," she said, "that he's using Owen's medical records to prove you're unstable." Her words landed like gravel thrown at glass. For a second, the air in the room thickened, and the edges of my vision blurred. "He can't," I started, but I stopped myself. Of course he could. He'd already rehearsed this destruction in front of the world. "How long?" I asked instead. "Months," Lila said. "Probably since before the school incident. He's been staging evidence to file an emergency custody motion." I pressed my hand to my forehead, feeling heat bloom beneath my palm. "He's not even subtle anymore," I muttered. "He doesn't need to be," she said quietly. "He thinks he's already won." When we hung up, I sat there in silence, the hum of the fluorescent light buzzing like an insect trapped inside my skull. I imagined Victor's smile, that small, upward curve of satisfaction he used when he thought he was smarter than everyone. Then came Owen's face, his fear, his confusion, his voice trembling as he repeated words that weren't his. My body shook once, like it was trying to release a scream that had no shape. I rose slowly, walked to the filing cabinet, and took out every document I'd ever saved: medical notes, school forms, therapy summaries. Each one now felt like a weapon he'd tried to turn against me. By evening, I drove to Lila's office near the harbor. The air smelled of salt and diesel, rough and real. She sat behind her desk, screens glowing around her like constellations of data. "Watch this," she said, pulling up a file. It was an email chain between Victor and a trust attorney. The subject line, "Custody plus equity release." The message read, "Once custody is secured, proceed with property conversion." Beneath it, Dana's name appeared in the CC line. My throat went cold. He promised her. "Consulting work?" I asked. Lila nodded. "A retainer for submitting reports that make you look negligent." She clicked another file, showing financial transfers labeled "Consulting Retainers." There were 6, all signed by Victor. I leaned against the desk, eyes burning. "He built his empire on my son's illness," I said, the words tasting like ash. "And he did it with help." My reflection in the window behind Lila looked calm, but inside, a collapse was underway, quiet, total, inevitable. Everything I'd believed about family, love, loyalty cracked like thin glass under heat. I thought of the nights we'd shared wine, the way he'd kissed my forehead after bad days, the softness he'd used as camouflage. None of it was real. Every moment had been choreography for this betrayal. I sank into the chair opposite her, breathing slow through the tremor in my chest. "What do we do now?" I asked. Lila's eyes softened, but her answer carried steel. "We stop reacting," she said. "We start controlling the narrative." I nodded, swallowing grief like medicine. "Then let's burn his script," I whispered. She came to the door before I could breathe another plan into being. Tessa stood framed in the doorway, cheeks hollowed by sleeplessness, holding a paper bag like contrition. Her eyes found mine, and then the laptop on the table, the screen like an accusation. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said, voice small and raw. I gestured for her to sit, words lodged like stones in my throat. She sat, hands in her lap, the paper bag crinkling like ice under palm. The room smelled of lemon and old books, the scent of our mother's house on holidays. Outside, gulls argued over the harbor, indifferent to human wreckage and family ruins. For a moment, the world outside stayed ordinary, and that ordinary made her confession louder. She told the story like someone reading a will aloud, each sentence measured. Careful, my boutique was drowning, she said. Loans, inventory, a partner who vanished. She kept her gaze steady, unwilling to soften the blow with tears. I asked him for help, she said, and the name landed on the table like a match. I pictured Victor's polite smile, the way he'd hovered in my life like a shadow at a lamp. Tessa explained how he offered an exit, equity access after custody, a refinance that would clear her debt. He promised me the paperwork would be clean, she said. No one would know. She folded her hands and looked like a woman confessing to a mercy she'd believed would save her life. You used our son, I said sharply, because the heir needed that fracture. The words hit the table, clumsy and necessary. She flinched, not because of guilt, but because the truth had a sound. I thought it would stop the bills, she whispered, and Owen would be okay. Her sentence cracked then, the lie beneath fragile as sugar. You were wrong, I replied. Fury and grief braided into sameness. She reached for my hand, but I drew it back, like a burn-marked skin on contact. Why not ask me? I asked, voice low, spent. Why go behind me? Her answer was a silence shaped like regret, and it hurt more than any lie. Then, Tessa did something I hadn't expected. She slid the paper bag across the table toward me. Inside, folded and creased, were small white envelopes, receipts, a cashier's checklist. I kept copies, she said, because I couldn't live with the thought of what I'd done. Her fingers trembled, and the receipts rattled like confession beads. She'd kept proof of transactions, notes from Victor, dates and promises listed in his handwriting. I wanted to give them to you sooner, she said. I was ashamed. The shame in her voice cleaned something raw inside me, but it didn't erase betrayal. Evidence laid bare felt like windows opening into a house on fire. I sat back and let the papers breathe. Between us, each sheet was balance and indictment together. Lila had mapped the networks, but Tessa had handed me the human ledger names, amounts, dates, tied to desperation. A part of me wanted to cradle her, and a larger part wanted to stand and scream until dawn. Instead, I folded the receipts like a professional might fold paper into proof. You traded my home for your survival, I said quietly, and called it love. She looked up, eyes wet but clear. I thought survival was love, she said simply, the kind of truth that collapses a room. The twist wasn't that she helped Victor, it was what underpinned her choice. Tessa revealed a last line I hadn't seen coming. They didn't only want equity, she said, voice small and shaking. They wanted me to keep quiet about something else. Her hand trembled over the table and she swallowed. Victor owes someone more than money. She named a man I'd never heard, a local lender with teeth and patience, a private creditor who'd started calling after her partner vanished. If I didn't help with custody, he'd come after me, she said. He promised protection if I cooperated. The protection had a price tag measured in my son's future. I felt my world tilt in a new direction, not simpler, not cleaner. The betrayal had roots deeper than greed. Fear had dug them there. I folded the receipts into my pocket, each crease a new plan forming. My hands were steady now, not from calm but from resolution. We won't let him buy safety with our son, I said. Tessa nodded, a small shudder passing through her. She had become a casualty and a witness both. The collapse had finished, but from the rubble something like a strategy began to breathe. Dawn arrived pale and brittle, the kind of morning that felt like thin glass. I stood at the sink, hands submerged in cold water, watching sunlight bleed across the countertop. Every sound in the house was deliberate now, the hum of the fridge, the slow tick of the clock, even my own breath moving through the still air. Tessa had left before sunrise, leaving her guilt folded on the kitchen chair. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. The truth she'd given me had already carved the path forward. What had been chaos the night before had hardened overnight into focus. I was calm now, unnervingly so. Revenge, I realized, wasn't rage. It was rhythm. I made coffee and opened my laptop, spreading out documents across the table like an altar. Each sheet carried the story Victor thought I'd never read: receipts, withdrawals, fabricated reports. I organized them by date, highlighting connections with yellow ink. The line from Owen's medication to Victor's bank account glowed like a string of lights leading directly to him. Lila's data matched Tessa's proof perfectly, down to the timestamps. It wasn't luck anymore. It was law waiting to be spoken. My pulse steadied as I imagined the precision required. No outbursts, no screaming. just quiet, surgical justice. When Lila arrived mid-morning, she found me sitting at the table, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. "You look like someone about to take an exam," she said, dropping her bag on the chair. "In a way, I am," I replied. "One question, one answer." She smiled faintly. "Then let's make it perfect." We went through everything: digital backups, notarized copies, recordings. Lila arranged them into an order that would satisfy legal audits and compliance boards. "He's sloppy," she said. "He thought fear would make you freeze." "He almost succeeded," I admitted, "but now it's my turn." After she left, I sat alone again, the quiet no longer unbearable but sacred. I needed one more thing, a gesture of normalcy to hide the storm beneath. That evening, I went down to the marina, where the air smelled of salt and sun-baked wood. The sea had always been my reset button, the sound that taught me patience. I sat on the dock, watching waves slap against the posts, steady and relentless. In that rhythm, I found the calm I'd been searching for. The world didn't owe me peace. I had to create it myself. I pulled my phone from my pocket and began recording a message to Owen. "Hey, sweetheart," I began softly, voice steady despite the wind. "I know things have been strange lately. I know you've heard things that hurt. I just need you to remember something: truth doesn't yell. It waits. It watches. It comes home when it's ready." I paused, swallowing emotion before it could surface. "I'll fix this, and when I do, I want you to see it happen. Not because I need to be right, but because I need you to know what right looks like." My voice cracked slightly, but I kept going. "I'm proud of you, even when you don't look at me. Especially then." I ended the recording, saved it, and labeled it, "For Owen, when ready." Back home, I cleared the living room and began reorganizing the walls. Family photos, awards, certificates, each one carefully placed and reframed, not to decorate, but to document. I added small QR stickers to the corners, each linked to a certified log or verified email. It looked ordinary, but anyone paying attention would see the pattern, the timeline, truth, disguised as art. I placed a single vase of white lilies on the table, their scent clean and sharp. Symbolic calm, I thought, the kind that comes before thunder. By midnight, I had finished labeling folders and sealing envelopes. I locked them in a fireproof case, slid it under the bed, and exhaled for the first time all day. I thought of Victor asleep somewhere else, dreaming of victory. I thought of Dana, checking her phone for updates that would never come. And I thought of Tessa, maybe crying, maybe drinking, maybe both. Each of them believed they'd written the final act. But I knew better now. Morning would come again, and with it, the precision of my next move. I closed my eyes and whispered to the dark, "The calm is over. It's time to begin." I laid the plan out like a map on my kitchen table, precise and cold-eyed, each route named for the person who would walk it. Lila called it choreography. I called it necessary patience, the kind that carves slow justice. I invited Victor to a charity dinner under the guise of honoring local educators, a public event with soft lighting and cameras that belonged to neighbors who owed favors. I arranged for Tessa to send him the invitation, guilt twisting into bait she could finally understand. I asked a pediatrician friend to speak about medication safety, framing the night as community education rather than accusation. Lila scheduled an anonymous tip to the bank's fraud unit, asking them to review recent transfers tied to Victor's account, timing the complaint to trigger an immediate compliance inquiry that would arrive within 48 hours. I put a notarized copy of the pharmacy receipts into a sealed envelope, then slid that envelope into a cookbook on my shelf, an unlikely place for paper and an obvious hiding spot for curious hands. I printed timelines and tucked them into frames I planned to display near the entryway, each frame a quiet provocation that anyone looking would find strangely detailed. I recorded a short message for Owen and labeled it for a private moment during the evening, a soft anchor that would show my steadiness rather than perform pain. The mechanics were legal, careful, and deliberately boring. Nothing illegal meant no easy counters. The bank's compliance team would act on procedure when the tip arrived, not on gossip. The pediatrician's talk would prompt questions, and the questions would be public. I arranged for a local reporter disguised as a volunteer to attend, someone with a taste for small-town accountability and no patience for sugar-coated lies. Lila arranged for a certified courier to deliver a duplicate evidence packet to the state education inspector, mailed as routine documentation from a concerned parent. I called the inspector anonymously at the appointed hour to confirm receipt, careful not to speak more than necessary. Tessa agreed to leave physical copies of receipts and dates in Victor's car under the passenger seat, a place he would find them only after the night began to fray. Her hands shook when she agreed, but the relief after felt like water to a parched land. I told her quietly that survival without accountability would not be survival at all. On the night, I would be calm and ordinary, a woman pouring tea and smiling, the host no one suspected. My role was to be everything they assumed I already was: composed, gracious, harmless. I would serve small plates and listen, letting their words float out and settle into the room where cameras caught their shapes. At the exact moment Lila texted, the bank's compliance officer would approach Victor like a neighbor asking a favor, whispering that a hold had been placed pending review. The reporter would stand, notebook out, asking the soft question that sounded like concern: has anyone explained these transfers or the consulting retainer? The question would be a public hinge swinging everything into sight. Victor's practiced smile would falter under the weight of procedure and present witnesses. Dana would be there, invited as an alum of the school, her face a mask that might crack when asked about student records. I wanted no theatrics from me. I wanted paperwork and questions, the kind that compels witnesses to speak truth without needing my voice. I rehearsed lines in the mirror so my face would not betray the moment. I invited you all here for community learning, I would say softly when asked why, because our children deserve honesty. It was not a speech for spectacle. It was a house guest's defense, dressed as civility. I prepared an exit strategy for Owen, so he would not witness the collapse. A sleepover at a neighbor's, gentle and safe, his absence a shield rather than a wound. I packed a small packet of copies to hand secretively to the inspector if needed, and I labeled every file with dates and times like a librarian cataloging evidence. Each move was designed to let systems do the unmasking, not my fury. When the bank officer read the hold notice aloud and the room tilted towards silence, I would press play on Owen's message, letting his small voice anchor the evening in love, not accusation. By dawn, the plan felt less like vengeance and more like remedial law. I had weaponized truth, not malice, and given it a room full of witnesses. I slept for 3 hours before the event, my mind a map of timelines and contingencies. When I woke, I folded my dress and tucked a copy of the chronology into its pocket. The house smelled like lilies and possibility. I breathed in and whispered, "This is for you," and thought of Owen smiling on a swing, high and honest. I locked the door, walked toward the light, and let the choreography begin. The night of the gratitude dinner arrived like a stage call, every prop rehearsed, every heartbeat marked. I stood before the mirror, fastening a delicate gold chain around my neck, one Victor had given me years ago when affection was still currency. My reflection was calm, maybe too calm, like a lake seconds before a storm. Outside, the house glowed in warm lamplight, the kind neighbors trusted. Plates clinked, the soft hum of music drifted through the air, and every surface gleamed with the effort of forgiveness I no longer intended to give. The lilies on the table leaned slightly toward the light, their fragrance both innocent and invasive. I had set the scene with precision, wine poured, appetizers plated, the air thick with civility. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang, once, then twice. I glanced toward the camera by the hallway mirror, a discreet black lens blending with decor. The recording light blinked red, steady as a pulse. I opened the door to find Victor first, polished as ever in his tailored suit, carrying the charm of a man who believed in his own myth. Behind him came Dana, polite smile stretched thin, and finally Tessa, pale but composed. "You look radiant," Victor said, kissing the air near my cheek. I smiled. "So do you," I replied, and gestured them inside. My tone was gentle, practiced, the same one I used to soothe Owen after nightmares, except tonight, I wasn't the one who'd wake screaming. We moved through small talk like actors following invisible marks. Dana complimented the food. Tessa poured wine with trembling hands. Victor kept checking his phone, expecting confirmation from someone who would never message back. I let the conversation drift toward safety before introducing the evening's theme. "I wanted tonight to be about gratitude," I said softly, clinking my glass. "We've all had a hard season, haven't we? But honesty, accountability, and healing start with presence." Their glasses rose automatically, a reflex born of etiquette, not conviction. I took a slow sip, let silence stretch long enough for unease to settle. At 7:40, Lila's message arrived on the secure line, "Courier in position." I excused myself to check the oven. though I'd turned it off an hour ago. From the kitchen window, I saw the silhouette of a man in uniform approach the house carrying a sealed envelope. Perfect timing. I returned to the living room just as the doorbell rang again. "Expecting someone?" Victor asked, brow furrowing. "Probably a delivery mix-up," I said lightly, wiping my hands. I opened the door and smiled at the courier. "Compliance division, sir," he said, handing the envelope directly to Victor. "Verification needed, signature required." Confusion flickered in his eyes as he signed, the pen slipping slightly. The courier left with polite efficiency, the quiet professionalism, and of bureaucracy at work. Victor broke the seal. Papers slid out, the top one stamped "Notice of Account Review." His pupils shrank as he scanned the first lines. "What is this?" he demanded. "A mistake?" I asked, tilting my head. "You should read it aloud." He hesitated, sensing the trap too late. "It says, financial irregularities, under investigation, pending verification of educational disbursements." Dana's wine glass clinked against the table as her hand jerked. Tessa sat rigid, eyes wide, the air between us thick with exposure. Before Victor could speak, the doorbell rang again. This time it was the bank officer and actual compliance investigator Lila had prepped under confidentiality. "Mr. Hanlon," he said briskly, "we'll need a few signatures to confirm record authenticity. It's routine." Victor's mouth opened, but no sound came. The officer produced a clipboard. Detached, efficient, unstoppable. Behind him, another figure appeared, a school board liaison I'd invited to honor our district's transparency efforts. Her expression was pleasant but sharp. "I heard there might be documentation to discuss," she said. The room had turned into a tribunal disguised as a dinner. I poured tea and set the cup before Victor like an offering. "You always said clarity was key," I murmured. Dana tried to speak, voice cracking. This isn't appropriate." The liaison turned to her with a courteous smile. "Transparency always is." I could see Dana's confidence unraveling, her career flashing before her eyes in procedural language and ethics reviews. Victor began pacing, muttering about miscommunication and clerical errors, his face blotched with panic. The compliance officer asked calm, precise questions, each one slicing away his defenses. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. The truth was performing beautifully on its own. Then came the final beat. I stood and walked to the shelf, lifting a framed photo of Owen, his smile pure, untouched by this chaos. "I want to share something," I said, pressing the small remote Lila had given me. From the speaker hidden in the corner, Owen's recorded voice filled the room. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry for what I said that night. Dad said you'd understand." The sound froze them all. Victor's head snapped toward me, horror dawning behind his mask. "You recorded him?" he hissed. "No," I said evenly. "He recorded himself." I let the silence expand, heavy as judgment. When the audio ended, I placed the frame back, careful and gentle. "Dinner's over," I said quietly. The compliance officer nodded, gathered his files and left. The liaison followed, leaving a card on the table. Dana rose slowly, color draining from her face. "This isn't finished," Victor warned, voice cracking around the words. I met his gaze and smiled, a calmness so complete it frightened even me. "Oh, it is," I whispered. "You just haven't realized it yet." The door closed behind them with the finality of a sentence being carried out. The house fell still again. The lilies stood perfect, scent heavy and sweet, like victory wrapped in mourning. I sank into the chair, hands trembling now that the performance was done. Revenge hadn't roared, it had breathed. And in that breath, I found peace sharper than fury. The night unfolded like a film reel, unspooling too slowly to stop. After the door closed, I sat in the quiet for a long time, listening to the tick of the clock and the faint whisper of the ocean through the window. My pulse still raced, though my body had gone still, the strange calm that comes when adrenaline burns itself into resolve. I could almost hear Victor's car engine fade down the street, the sound of arrogance driving itself into ruin. The next phase would not be loud. It would be procedural, documented, and irreversible. I poured myself another glass of wine, though I didn't drink it. It was a prop now, the symbol of normalcy in a house that had just become a battlefield of paper and truth. By morning, the calls began. First from the bank, polite, clipped, curious about account verification and missing funds. I answered each question in slow, even tones, offering only what was already public record. "Yes, that's my husband's business account," I said. "No, I'm not an authorized signer anymore. My voice carried no accusation, only weary precision. The woman on the line paused, perhaps sensing the undertow of something larger. "Thank you, Mrs. Hanlon," she said softly. "We'll be in touch." Next came an email from the school board. The liaison I'd invited had submitted a full report. Dana's name appeared 3 times under ethics concern. A note followed. "Preliminary review underway. Expect contact for testimony." I read it twice, then closed my laptop, heart steady. The gears had started turning, and none of them belonged to me anymore. By noon, Lila arrived, her expression unreadable but her eyes alive with satisfaction. "It worked," she said simply, setting a folder on the table. Inside were screenshots of online filings, formal inquiries, case numbers, timestamps. Victor's accounts were flagged, Dana's credentials under review, and Tessa's financial transfers marked for questioning. "They'll scramble for a while," Lila continued. "Try to spin it, but they're boxed in. Every document you released was traceable to their signatures, not yours." I let out a long, quiet breath. The revenge wasn't a spectacle. It was a sequence of events unfolding exactly as planned. I hadn't destroyed them. I just removed the lies that held them upright. Then came the text message from Victor, short and desperate. "We need to talk. Please. You don't understand what you've done." I stared at the words for a long moment, remembering all the times he'd used that same tone to make guilt sound like affection. This time, it was fear. I typed back, "You should speak with your compliance officer. No anger, no indulgence, just the truth, cold and absolute." I set the phone down and turned to the window, watching sunlight glance off the sea. Justice didn't always arrive wearing sirens. Sometimes it came dressed in paperwork and silence. That afternoon, a black sedan pulled into the driveway Tessa's. She stepped out slowly, face drawn but resolute. "They called me," she said, voice trembling. "Bank investigator. They said Victor's account is frozen. They asked about me." I nodded. "Tell them the truth." Tears filled her eyes. "He's furious, you know. Said I ruined everything." "You didn't," I said softly. "You just finally told the truth out loud." She nodded once, a small motion heavy with regret. "He won't stop," she whispered. "You know that, right?" I looked past her to the horizon. "He can't stop something that's already finished." That night, I sat at the same kitchen table where the first accusation had shattered my life, only now it felt different, lighter, somehow. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet earned, not forced. I opened my laptop one more time and clicked on Owen's message, letting his voice fill the room again. "Mom," he said softer this time, "I'm sorry for what I said." I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me like a tide reclaiming the shore. "I forgive you," I whispered back, even though he couldn't hear it yet. Forgiveness wasn't surrender anymore. It was freedom from the wreckage Victor had built. Later, when the sky turned the color of old bruises, I walked outside barefoot. The air smelled like salt and dusk, the world washed clean by wind. I thought of all the times I'd wanted revenge, to look like fire, loud, destructive, cinematic. But it wasn't. It was this. Calm, inevitable, exact. The documents I'd released would ripple outward for months, quietly dismantling every illusion Victor had built. Dana would lose her license. Tessa would testify under immunity. And Victor he'd face his own reflection under fluorescent light, wondering when the control had slipped away. He'd learn that real punishment isn't losing everything. It's watching someone walk away from you unbroken. When I went back inside, I poured out the wine and rinsed the glass. I turned off the lights, letting the moonlight own the room. My phone buzzed again, a final message from Victor. "You think you've won, but you'll regret this." I didn't respond. Some threats are just echoes of dying power. I placed the phone face down and whispered, "You already lost." Then I picked up my notebook, wrote the date, and closed it for the last time. Outside, the sea continued its endless rhythm, patient and relentless. Justice, I realized, wasn't the opposite of mercy, it was its evolution. And as the tide came in, carrying away the night's old noise, I smiled. The truth had done the work for me. Morning sunlight spilled across the floor like gold paint trying to heal cracks. I woke to quiet, a kind that felt earned, not eerie. My first thought wasn't Victor or Dana or Tessa, it was Owen. His name still lived at the center of everything, a small, beating truth untouched by their ruin. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the mail truck pause outside. The world was still moving, oblivious to the slow implosion unfolding inside town offices and school board inboxes. My phone buzzed on the counter, not messages this time, but notifications. The local paper's site, a blog post titled "School Counselor Under Investigation for Ethics Violations." The thumbnail was Dana's staff photo, smiling in better days. Beneath it, Victor's company name appeared in the subheading, mentioned in connection with a financial audit. I clicked it open, my pulse steady, almost detached. Reading about them felt like closing a book I'd once been trapped inside. By noon, whispers had turned into conversations, and conversations into speculation. At the market, 2 women near the produce aisle lowered their voices when they saw me. "She's the one whose husband," one began. "Ex-husband," I corrected, smiling as I passed. The words tasted clean for the first time. Small towns thrive on stories, and mine had become a lesson in quiet revenge. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Every time I walked down the street, I carried a calm that unnerved people used to seeing women apologize for surviving. Even the air seemed lighter now, that I wasn't pretending to keep a family that had already betrayed me. Tessa called that afternoon, her voice steadier than I expected. "They're questioning me tomorrow," she said. "I'm going to tell them everything." "Good," I replied softly. "No edits this time." She hesitated, then added, "I started packing. I can't stay here." I didn't blame her. Guilt and geography don't coexist easily. "Send me a forwarding address when you're ready," I said. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't have to. Some relationships end not with final words, but with mutual exhaustion. After the call, I sat at the piano, fingers hovering over keys I hadn't touched in months. I played a few slow chords, each note vibrating through the silence. The melody wavered, fragile but free, like breath after grief. Later I met Lila by the pier. The wind tugged at her coat as she handed me a folder. "They're pressing charges," she said. "Forgery, misappropriation, conspiracy. Dana's cooperating in exchange for leniency." I nodded, absorbing the words. "And Victor?" I asked. "Still fighting," she replied. "But his accounts are frozen and his lawyer just withdrew. He's cornered." Her tone wasn't triumphant, just factual, like an equation that had finally balanced. "You did it," she said, eyes narrowing slightly in approval. I shook my head. "No, the truth did," she smirked. "Don't romanticize it too much. You were the one brave enough to show your teeth." The wind picked up, scattering gulls into flight. I looked toward the horizon, the water shifting shades of gray and silver. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm done biting." That evening, a news van parked down the street, lights blinking softly through my curtains. I ignored it. I didn't owe them a statement or a performance. My silence was the statement now control reclaimed in absence of noise. Instead, I called Owen. His voice sounded hesitant but warm. "Mom?" he said. "Hey, sweetheart." There was a pause long enough to break my heart in two. "Dad's mad," he whispered. "I know," I said gently. "But that's his to fix, not yours." He sniffled. "Are you mad at me?" The question sliced through me, soft and fatal. "Never," I said. "You were just caught in someone else's story. Now we're writing ours." His breathing steadied, and I could hear him smile through the phone. "Can I come home soon?" he asked. My throat tightened. "Soon," I promised. "Very soon." After the call, I stepped outside, barefoot on the porch, letting the sea wind erase the last of the evening's weight. The stars above were dim but honest, faint specks of persistence in an uncomplicated sky. The town's gossip would fade, papers would yellow, names would shift to new scandals. But my truth would stay, quiet and permanent. Revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about restoration. And for the first time, I felt something close to peace blooming in the hollow spaces betrayal had carved. The courthouse smelled of coffee and old paper, that scent of judgment baked into every corner. I sat at the back, calm and still, as Victor shuffled through his lawyer's replacement notes, face pale but defiant. He wore his favorite navy suit, the one from every family photo, every speech, every lie, as if the fabric itself could save him. The clerk called the session to order. Reporters whispered like restless ghosts, their pens twitching for drama. But there was no spectacle here, no raised voices or gavel cracks, just the soft inevitability of consequences. Dana sat 2 rows ahead, hands clasped tightly, mascara already beginning to betray her composure. The prosecutor listed counts: falsified compliance forms, misuse of funds, attempted custodial fraud, each word a stone laid neatly onto the path he'd built himself. When the judge asked if Victor had anything to say, he rose, slicking back his hair with that old, familiar arrogance. "Your Honor," he began, "this has been blown out of proportion." "My wife," He hesitated, catching himself. My ex-wife misunderstood my intentions. The word wife still stung him. I saw it. This was about securing stability for my son. He said my son like ownership, not love. I looked straight at him, not with anger but with exhaustion so complete it almost looked like pity. The judge's gaze shifted to me for a moment, then back to Victor. "Mr. Hanlon," she said coolly, "stability built on deception is still fraud." His jaw tightened. The courtroom murmured. Somewhere behind me a camera shutter clicked. The sound was clean, final. Outside, the air was thick with gossip. Microphones hovered, questions flew, and I walked through them like mist. "Mrs. Hanlon, do you feel vindicated?" one reporter called. I paused just long enough to answer. "I feel free," I said, and kept walking. My car waited at the curb, the same old blue sedan that had carried me through breakdowns and revelations. Inside, the world finally exhaled. I sat with my hands on the wheel, letting silence wrap around me. Lila texted a single line. "It's done," I replied with 2 words. "Thank you." That was all that needed saying. By afternoon, news spread faster than weather. Headlines, hashtags, sympathetic strangers dissecting my pain for content. I turned off every alert. Justice didn't need witnesses. It only needed to exist. I walked down to the beach instead, wind clawing through my hair, waves roaring against the rocks like applause from something older than law. A child nearby chased gulls, laughing the way Owen once had. I watched the boy's mother lift him, spinning until both collapsed into sand and sunlight. It was such a simple picture of safety that my eyes stung. Maybe one day Owen and I would have that again, laughter unshadowed by courtrooms or lies. Maybe healing didn't have to be loud. Maybe it just had to be patient. That evening, Victor's last message arrived a voice note. His tone was different now, stripped of polish, all sharp edges dulled by fear. "You win," he said. "Happy? You ruined me. Dana's gone. Tessa's hiding. I don't even know who I am anymore." I listened twice, then deleted it. Some truths didn't deserve to live in memory. The revenge was complete, but what lingered wasn't satisfaction. It was quiet, clean closure. I had wanted justice, but what I got was distance, and distance was better. It left room to breathe. Owen came home 2 weeks later, suitcase dragging across the porch boards, eyes unsure but hopeful. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I didn't rush him. I just knelt and opened my arms. He stepped into them without hesitation, face pressed against my shoulder. "I missed you," he whispered. "I missed you more," I said. We stood there in the fading light, the world around us indifferent and perfect. There were no grand declarations, no cinematic tears, just a mother and son reclaiming what had been stolen. That night, after he fell asleep, I walked through the house quietly, turning off lights one by one. The scent of lilies had faded, replaced by something softer peace, maybe. I looked at the family photo on the wall, the one I used to hate, and smiled faintly. It no longer hurt. It was just history now, proof that even the worst storms eventually exhaust themselves. I whispered into the stillness, "We made it through," and let the house breathe again. Morning light spilled across Owen's room, soft and golden, catching on the dust motes like little ghosts of peace returning. He slept in his old bed again, one leg dangling over the side, the faint snore of safety humming through the house. I stood at the doorway, coffee warming my hands, watching him the way I used to before everything fell apart. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of silence. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was healing. Downstairs, the walls smelled faintly of paint and lemon, the remnants of last weekend's rebuild. I'd changed the color, no more sterile white, but a warm sage, the kind that made breathing feel easier. The house didn't carry his ghost anymore. It carried mine, and she was alive. After breakfast, Owen helped me move boxes labeled "Past" to the attic. He didn't ask what was inside. Maybe he already knew. We worked quietly the way people do when words aren't necessary. When he looked up at me and smiled, the same dimple that used to undo me flickered back to life. "Can we go to the park later?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "But first, pancakes." His grin widened, and for a moment, he was just a kid again. No courtroom shadows, no whispered lies, no weight heavier than syrup. The smell of butter filled the kitchen, and something small and sacred in me began to knit back together. Revenge had ended, but the rebuilding had only begun, brick by careful brick. Later, at the park, the air tasted like sunlight and salt. Owen rode his bike along the path, his laughter cutting through the hum of the waves nearby. I sat on the bench, notebook in hand, jotting words I hadn't touched in years. Not evidence this time, stories. Little lines about love that survives and truth that costs but cleans. Each page felt lighter than the one before. I didn't need to write Victor's name anymore. He had become a lesson, not a character. Behind me, a couple passed, their hands intertwined, and I smiled without bitterness. It felt strange, almost foreign, to wish someone else well and mean it. Healing, I realized, was quieter than revenge, but it lasted longer. When we came home, the mailbox held a single letter addressed in Tessa's handwriting. Inside was a short note and a photo of a small storefront, her new boutique in another town. "Starting over," she'd written. "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have." I stared at the photo for a long moment, then set it beside the family picture on the mantel. Maybe forgiveness wasn't absolution. Maybe it was just permission to move forward. I'd given her that, not for her sake, but for mine. The house no longer felt haunted, it felt honest. That night, Owen curled up beside me on the couch, half asleep during an old movie. I brushed his hair back, feeling his heartbeat steady against my arm. "We're okay, Mom," he murmured without opening his eyes. "We are," I whispered back. "We really are." Outside, the wind rattled the windows softly, not as warning but as song. The sea was still there, endless and forgiving. I thought of all the ways revenge could have consumed me, and how, in the end, it had delivered something gentler, closure wrapped in truth. I exhaled deeply, resting my head against the cushion. The war was over. What remained was love, rebuilt from ashes, unshaken and alive. The rain began softly that evening, tapping against the windows like an old friend too polite to knock. The sound filled the house in a way silence never could, a kind of rhythm that spoke of cleansing rather than sorrow. I sat at my desk by the window, pen moving across the last page of my journal. There was nothing left to document, no schemes, no proofs, no timelines, just reflection. I wrote about Owen's laugh at breakfast, about the smell of wet grass, about the strange peace that comes when your story finally exhales. My handwriting was slower now, less frantic, as if time had finally loosened its grip on my pulse. I looked up at the framed photo on the wall, not the old family one, but the new picture from the park last week. Owen stood there, muddy shoes, wild grin, one arm flung around my shoulder. My smile looked real for once. Not perfect, not practiced real. Below it sat Tessa's note, still folded, her words a quiet apology that no longer hurt. I'd forgiven her, truly. Not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace more than she deserved punishment. There's a difference between letting someone off and letting yourself go free. The fire crackled low in the hearth, a soft orange pulse against the dim. I picked up my phone, recording one final message. My voice steady but warm, the kind of tone Auntie May herself might have used if she'd lived my story. "Sometimes," I said, "revenge looks nothing like fire. Sometimes it looks like stillness, the quiet of a morning where no one controls you anymore. If you've been hurt, don't rush to destroy. Just collect truth, protect your peace, and let time do its slow, beautiful work." I paused, smiling. "And if this story found you tonight, maybe it's because you needed to remember that survival can sound gentle too." I leaned back, listening to the rain strengthen outside. Drops slid down the glass, racing each other like children, careless and free. I thought about the years I'd spent fighting storms I didn't start, and how this moment, this quiet house, this steady heart was my reward. Revenge hadn't rebuilt my life. I had. The evidence, the exposure, the justice, all of it had been steps, not destinations. The real triumph was here, in the small acts. Planting herbs by the kitchen window, teaching Owen how to fold laundry, sleeping through the night without dreams of accusation. Peace wasn't something I'd found. It was something I'd chosen. Before heading to bed, I opened the front door and stood on the porch. The rain soaked my hair and the hem of my sweater, but I didn't step back. I looked up at the gray sky, letting the cool drops trace down my cheeks. The ocean's roar blended with thunder in the distance, a reminder that storms still existed, they just didn't own me anymore. I closed my eyes, whispered a quiet thank you to the night, and smiled. "We're okay," I said to no one and everyone. "We made it." Then, softly into the microphone I kept by the desk, I spoke my final outro for the listeners who had followed my story this far. If this story touched something in you, remember healing doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, "Keep going." Share this with someone who forgot that endings can be gentle too. And if you found a piece of yourself here tonight, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every heart that heals deserves to be heard. The recording light blinked off, the house settled into silence, and for the first time, I truly felt it: not victory, not revenge, just freedom.